Have you ever heard of Flight 124, which landed safely on the Missouri River, saving all the passengers and crew members? It was a calm morning in the Midwest, as the sun began to rise over the tranquil landscape of the Missouri River. The birds were already singing their familiar tunes. The grass glistened with dew, and the air was crisp. An ordinary day by all measures. But it was about to become anything but ordinary. Flight 124, a commercial airliner traveling from Denver to St. Louis, cruised peacefully at 35,000 feet above the heartland of America. On board were over 100 passengers, each with their own stories, anxieties, and dreams for the day ahead. But none of them could have imagined that their morning would end with a spectacle that would become etched in the annals of aviation history. The engine started to sputter. At first, it was just a subtle vibration, almost imperceptible. But it grew louder, the rumble of the turbine's instability unmistakable. Anna immediately checked the fuel gauges. The numbers were dropping at an alarming rate, faster than they should have been. The plane's fuel system was malfunctioning, an issue no one had predicted. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," Jim radioed the air traffic control tower. "This is Flight 124. We have a fuel system failure. We're losing fuel rapidly and need to make an emergency landing." The voice on the other end responded swiftly. "Copy that, Flight 124. Can you provide your location?" "We're over the Missouri River, heading toward St. Louis. But we're losing power," Jim said. "We might not make it to the airport." There was a moment of silence before the response came. "Understood, Flight 124. We have cleared the Missouri River area for an emergency landing. You have permission to proceed. Please advise on your situation." Jim's eyes darted between the cockpit instruments, then out the window. The river stretched below them like a wide, flowing ribbon, its surface reflecting the clear sky. Despite the gravity of the situation, Jim could not help but feel a sense of surreal calm. "Anna," he said, looking over to his co-pilot, "prepare for an emergency landing. We'll have to try the river. It's our best option." Anna hesitated for just a fraction of a second before nodding. "Understood. I'll start the emergency procedures." The decision to land on the Missouri River was bold. A plane wasn't designed for water landings, and Jim knew it. The wings of the aircraft would likely get caught in the water, causing the plane to flip. The fuselage could split apart on impact, yet despite all the risks, it was the best chance they had. As the plane descended, the engines began to sputter more violently. The roaring sound from the turbines turned into an agonizing, grinding noise that echoed through the cabin. Jim focused on the river, trying to gauge the width, the current, and the best possible spot for landing. The river's wide expanse was both a blessing and a curse. He had to find a spot where the water was deep enough and the current wasn't too strong to destabilize the plane upon landing. "Brace for impact!" Jim shouted over the intercom. The passengers, initially unaware of the gravity of the situation, were now growing anxious. The plane's descent had grown steeper, and the subtle bumps in the air were becoming harsher. The flight attendants quickly ran up and down the aisles, instructing everyone to fasten their seatbelts and prepare for a crash landing. The plane's nose dipped toward the water. Jim gripped the yoke with both hands, his mind focused solely on the river below. Anna monitored the instruments, making sure the engines didn't shut down completely. It was as if time slowed down. The horizon tilted, the water growing closer, then further. The trees along the banks of the river appeared in quick flashes. The water rippled gently, a serene image at odds with the chaos inside the plane. The moment of truth was approaching. The airplane touched the water with a jolt. It was as if the earth itself had given way beneath them. The impact was violent, but Jim had managed to pull the nose up just enough to avoid the worst of it. The belly of the aircraft skidded across the river's surface, throwing up huge sprays of water on either side. The metal groaned as it scraped along the riverbed, but somehow the plane stayed intact. For a moment, Jim thought they had made it, until the plane lurched again, this time much harder. The fuselage twisted, the force of the landing pushing passengers forward as they clutched the armrests, but the plane held together. The moment stretched into eternity, and then it stopped. The airplane came to a halt in the middle of the river, water lapping against its wings. The engines were dead silent. The plane, once a symbol of human ingenuity and power, was now a grounded relic, resting on the calm waters of the Missouri River. For several long moments, there was only the sound of the water against the metal. Passengers slowly unbuckled their seatbelts, looking around in disbelief. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the cabin. Despite the severity of the situation, there were no fatalities. A few were shaken, some had minor cuts or bruises, but they were alive. Jim and Anna exchanged a quick glance, both in shock but determined to act. They immediately began the emergency evacuation procedures, instructing passengers to remain calm and make their way to the emergency exits. Jim knew that getting everyone out of the plane would be their top priority, as the situation on the river could change quickly. Outside the plane, the current of the Missouri River was gentle, but it still had the potential to carry the plane downstream. Jim opened the cockpit door and moved toward the rear of the plane. He could hear the frantic sound of the cabin crew trying to organize the passengers. "We need to get everyone out now," Anna urged, holding the emergency hatch open. The river's cool waters were slowly rising up the plane's belly, inch by inch. As passengers began to make their way down the emergency slides and onto the inflatable life rafts that had been deployed, Jim took a final look around. By the time the last of the passengers were safely off the plane, a fleet of rescue boats appeared on the horizon, their lights flashing brightly in the early morning sun. The authorities had received the Mayday call, and the Coast Guard was on its way. Jim and Anna made sure that all passengers were accounted for before they climbed into one of the rescue boats. It was a surreal moment as they looked back at the plane, stranded in the middle of the Missouri River. The hum of the engines, the rush of the flight, and the vast sky above seemed like a lifetime ago. As they were pulled to safety, Jim could hardly believe what had just transpired. An emergency landing on a river, one of the most improbable scenarios an airline pilot could face. Yet, against all odds, they had made it through. It was a miracle. Back on solid ground, the passengers and crew were met with cheers from the rescue teams. No one had been seriously injured, and the plane, though severely damaged, had withstood the improbable. It would go down in history as one of the most remarkable aviation feats, a story of survival, skill, and the unyielding will to live. In the weeks that followed, Flight 124's emergency landing would be hailed as an incredible feat of aviation, a testament to the expertise of Captain Carson, Lieutenant Green, and the entire crew. Experts from around the world analyzed the event, marveling at how such a scenario had played out. They would forever study the event as an example of what can be achieved when the human spirit faces the impossible. As for the passengers, they would go on to live their lives, carrying the memories of that fateful day with them. Some of them would write books, others would share their stories on television, and a few would quietly reflect on the narrow escape they had been granted. But for everyone involved, one thing was certain: They would never look at a river